From the BBC World Service, in association with ABC and Akashvani, this is Stumped.
Hello and welcome to Stumped, your intercontinental hit of news, features and debate from the quirky world of cricket. I'm Alison Mitchell in London, where the draft for the 100 has been taking place, the men's and women's competition that has now been flooded with cash in a big way from all sorts of billionaires from all walks of life. And actually now David Warner has signed for Justin Langer's London Spirit team at Lord's. That's the one that is co-owned by a consortium of Silicon Valley billionaires. So it's certainly attracting some big names this year.
G'day, Ali. Brett Sprigg for the ABC in Sydney, covering for Jim Maxwell again. I did touch on last week that our Sheffield Shield season was winding down, with South Australia now confirmed to host the final. Now, usually they wouldn't have use of Adelaide Oval at this time of the year because of AFL season, but a compromise is being worked on that would allow the Sheffield Shield final to be played there from Monday to Friday in between AFL games. The local football clubs don't seem too happy, but maybe it's a reminder that in the commercial David versus Goliath battle, because the Sheffield Shield is not a big money spinner, that maybe there is room for little old cricket after all.
Always room for cricket. Charu Sharma for Akashvani. I'm in Coorg on the Coffee Estate, where the picking might have ended, but, work never ends on an estate like cricket never ends in the world. So there's WPL going on. And of course, India have just come back from a major ICC title, and we're all set for one more edition of the IPL.
Yeah, well, it's India we want to focus on in this show, because we're going to ask whether India's men can maintain their dominance of ICC tournaments through to their home T20 World Cup in 2026. And that is because Gautam Gambhir's side were crowned ICC Men's Champions Trophy winners with that 4-wicket win over New Zealand in the final in Dubai. And that adds to the T20 World Cup they won in Barbados last July. So India have now won the last 2 ICC men's tournaments, only losing in the final of the third, which was the 2023 World Cup final against Australia. So that is 24 completed tournament matches, of which they've won 23 of them. That is quite the roll. But Charu, how has India's win been celebrated in these last few days?
Well, no ticker tape parade, I'm afraid. I noticed there saying there was a lot of crowd at the airport to receive some of the players, because they came back from Dubai in a bit of a fractured fashion. They didn't all land together. They went to their various cities, so there was no sort of major celebration. But I think the media was certainly very delighted that India had won the tournament, and of course, along the way, beating Pakistan. And for now, the big nemesis seems to be New Zealand. So 2 wins over New Zealand made them very happy for sure. And I think a lot of news really was surrounding those who were in some sort of trouble or question before the tournament started, whether their careers are going to be elongated or not. And I think all's quiet on that front for sure.
Well, yeah, we talked on last week's show about whether Rohit Sharma might retire, but no plans to retire from ODIs just yet.
No, in fact, there's some level of talk about, and from him too, about the 2007 World Cup. So, gosh, that's a couple of years away, or even a little more. And one can't argue now, because he was the man of the match at the final, and getting the big 70 against New Zealand, winning the match for India, and all is well on his front. And of course, there's a lot of noise now about, all of a sudden, say a few months ago, it was about how the board or selectors should interfere and maybe get these guys to, or hint to them that they should be going. Now it's all about, no, let them be. Let them take their own decision. They have a right to take their own decision in their own time. And I suppose there's some truth to that as well, because these guys are such huge heroes in India that it's going to be very difficult for people to axe them. But they will have to use their own wisdom to find out when they should leave the game. I think both Kohli and Sharma are in many ways ready. And had they gone down in the final, I suspect that decision to retire might have been hastened. But now, having won, both have scored, well, Rohit only in the final, have scored runs. They're back to being huge heroes in the country, and people can't see beyond them. So I'm afraid that's not fantastic news for the hungry young guys ready to replace them. But it does look like they are ready for longer innings, particularly in the ODIs. T20, of course, is a different kettle of fish, and both may leave that international reign of the T20 sooner. They may continue, of course, with the IPL, but looks like they're marking their crease for another long innings.
digging in. It was an iconic photograph, I thought, with Kohli and Rohit sort of stumps being held aloft when they walked off the field, having won. But Brett, Kohli reckons that this current India squad has enough talent to, in his words, take on the world for the next 8 years. What do you think? And more to the point, who's going to challenge India?
I mean, you could make the argument in some ways that this team has underperformed, if anything, over a period of time. India has a massive population of cricket lovers. I think in recent times, without going into the socio-political idea of things I don't really understand, it has worked out how to bring forth the talent from all manner of corners of that country. Look at Jasprit Bumrah, Yashasvi Jaiswal across the formats. I guess MS Dhoni and others came from a fairly humble background. I think India has found a way to truly harness the wide array of talent within 1.4 billion people. But in a pure cricket sense, I mean, no one is playing more cricket than India. I remember speaking to Harsha Bhogle before the most recent Border Gavaskar Trophy here in Australia when the squad was out here. But at that stage, you had the Test squad, the India A squad, and at the time, the T20 team was being led by Surya Kumar Yadav on a tour of South Africa. So even just in that national setup, at any one time, you could have 40 or 50 international quality players all boasting their own strengths and ability to be world-class players. And that's before you get to the overall power and influence in the game that India has these days. It seems, the cards are stacked well in their favour. I said last week that, okay, yes, they certainly got looked after by that whole situation in Dubai during the Champions Trophy. They also happen to be the best white ball team in the world. Both of those things can be true. So yeah, it's a time of transition, and a lot of those guys, as you say, will be sort of phased out over the next few years, or phase themselves out. Virat, Rohit, Jadoo, KL Rahul, maybe you could play a few more years. As to who stops them, it's a boring answer. I suppose New Zealand have been so consistent. You look at their ability, and speaking of, it's the opposite. It's a country with a small population that somehow manages to be a fantastic sporting performer. New Zealand have obviously, their final opponents from last week will be up there, as will Australia, because Australia has the resources to adapt and whatever else. I'll leave England till later on, Ali. We'll come back to that, I suppose, maybe later on. But it's just one of those. Yeah, I think it's probably going to come from Australia or New Zealand to be regular challenges to India. But look, the fact is there are going to be big tournaments held in India. The real test will come when they're playing in major tournaments outside the subcontinent. So that's what I look forward to seeing the most.
Well, given that the 2026 T20 World Cup is being staged in India and Sri Lanka, Charu, I mean, a lot can happen between now and then, not least an IPL and then an awful lot of test cricket between India and England's men. But who could challenge India in their own conditions?
It's strange because maybe a decade or two ago, it could have been the rest of the subcontinental teams, certainly Sri Lanka and Pakistan, but they seem to have gone back a bit.
Pakistan might be playing in India, we know that.
Well, true, but I mean, Sri Lanka perhaps. But I'll have to agree with Spriggy. I think Australia will continue to be the dominant team, men or women, around the world in any format, depending on their hunger. And I would like to suggest that Australia are just not very hung up on T20 cricket. They seem to treat it very lightly. A little more seriously one-day cricket, and of course very seriously test match cricket, but when it comes to a T20 World Cup, Australia just don't seem to care enough. And I wonder if it's going to be a team such as, say, South Africa, who might come in and just surprise us a bit because they've got quality everywhere. I know they're struggling with several other issues, but of late, I mean, they are playing the World Test Championship. They have done reasonably well. So it could be a dark horse there. I think the West Indies too are just not creating the new set of heroes. And I don't think it's going to be any subcontinental team. So India are pretty much huge title favourites in their home conditions or in subcontinental conditions without the other subcontinental teams mounting a challenge.
And a question for me will be whether Afghanistan can go, one step further, which we saw them compete
Good question,
to the semi-finals in 2024. I think they would be on track to win a T20 World Cup within the next 5 years.
I'm not so sure. Short answer to that, I don't think they're that ready because they'll have to beat many top-ranked teams consistently to win a tournament. They might win one or two, but not all of them.
But that's it. In tournament play, you just need those one-off wins, don't you? Sure, to win through a tournament to get to a semi-final stage, and then it's knockout cricket, 2 good games. I think keep an eye on Afghanistan in the coming years.
And the big thing will be, I suppose, Ali, as far as where you mentioned India, Sri Lanka. Can Afghanistan be just as strong in other parts of the world as well? Outside those sort of conditions will be a key thing as well. Yeah,
big ask for them to get over the line in a final if it is against a big team like India. Australia, they've been there. England, of course, they've been there. But yeah, a T20 World Cup, everything just seems that much more open, doesn't it? Now on Stumped, at the end of March, Cricket Australia will say goodbye to its chief executive, Nick Hockley, who's stepping down after almost 5 years in the role. He took charge on an interim basis in the early days of the COVID COVID pandemic and then was appointed full-time in May 2021. And I'm delighted to say that Nick joins us on Stumped now from Sydney. Nick, it's great to see you. We remembered you came on Stumped back in 2020 when you were just a couple of months into the role, and you described that time as one of crisis management. But 5 years on from that unprecedented time, what state do you leave Cricket Australia in?
Yeah, well, firstly, thank you so much for having me. It's great to see you. I think we've been through kind of 3 periods, one of crisis, then stability, which is all about putting in place long-term arrangements, whether that's with venues, with our broadcast partners in Australia, in India, and then really one of growth. So, just reflecting on this season gone, 373,000 at the Boxing Day Test. Really, cricket really at the heart of the conversation in Australia. Great support for the WBBL, the BBL, the Women's Ashes and the Border Gavaskar Series. And so it just feels that with an incredible forward plan, the Men's Ashes obviously next year, India out for a multi-format series, and then you think forward to Olympics and all of those things. It just feels, we're absolutely kind of, if you use a surfing analogy, kind of COVID tried to knock us off our board, but we're back up, we're surfing, and we're kind of riding the wave. So I'm just really, really proud of the team and all everyone, all the partners who supported across the journey. As you know better than anyone else, it's a big production. It involves lots of different groups of people, lots of different partners, and I just feel very privileged to have been involved.
Nick, hi, this is Charu Sharma from India. The IPL is about to start yet again. I don't know which season, the 18th. But you mentioned the player welfare is very important. But is it also likely to get much more difficult? You mentioned different formats of the game, but how about franchise leagues, which is the typical age-old club versus country controversy? How have you been able to come to terms with it over all these years? Is it just something that you will let evolve organically, or is there some sort of a plan brewing in the minds of administrators and cricketers about how do they share their time? Because it's a really difficult one, and I dare suggest we ain't seen nothing yet.
Yeah, I think we need to really be very well planned. I think we've put a lot of energy and time and thought into what the FDP looks like. I mean, I've been kind of very vocal over time about, I think all international cricket should count for qualification for something. So I'm really interested to understand the qualification mechanism for the Olympic Games. I think the World Test Championship's a fantastic development to create real context around individual series. But, I think if anything, there's more and more opportunities. So, a Pat Cummins, a Mitch Starc are not going to be able to play. They'll play IPL and they'll play kind of the big Test series and World Cups. They're not going to be able to play every league, and I think that just opens up more opportunities, kind of the next tier of player to really start to make their name. I mean, kind of the Big Bash final this year, Mitch Owen just burst onto the scene. There's lots of opportunities for people that are kind of not established in international squads to go and make a name for themselves in some of the other leagues around the world. But ultimately, we need to make sure that the players are being really well compensated for playing international cricket and playing in the top competitions. I mean, obviously, the IPL is just is one of the richest sports leagues in the world. But I think working when Todd was at the ACA, the Players Association, as part of our last player deal, we made sure that we were, as well as continuing to make great strides on gender equity and really leading on women's pay, we really made sure that our centrally contracted players are very well remunerated, and within the Big Bash salary cap we increased that so that we're really trying to recognise or keep the best players in those key competitions.
As you leave this role, what's the state with this conversation around a 2-tier Test championship? Because this was India, Australia, England coming together to discuss this. What can you tell us?
I can't say too much other than that we're pretty set for the next period. I think you've always got to be looking at ways to create context, jeopardy, the best versus the best. So I think it's something that's been talked about that's worth looking at, but it's by no means a plan or...
Because you can be honest now, because you're not going to be in the role and you won't be if this comes into effect, after the World Test Champ cycle finishes. Do you think it would be a good or bad thing for the game if it's no promotion, relegation. That's not going to help, is it? The growth with, lower tier nations getting that exposure.
I don't have a strong view on it, I have to say. I actually do feel that the entire system and how all the formats sit together, the World Test Championship is not perfect, but really much better than not having it. I love the fact that the T20 World Cup's now expanding to 20 teams and the cricket's in the Olympics, and so you're giving everyone an opportunity. I think the priority is making sure that all white ball games, and particularly 50 over games and series, count as qualifiers to make it to the One Day World Cup, so that there's a real pathway and a linkage. So I genuinely don't have a really strong view the two-tier concept.
Yeah. But it is still on the table then, as you gather. Talks are ongoing about that.
That's for those around the table, which I won't be, unfortunately.
Nick, I do want to finish us with a thought on the 150th anniversary Test match, which will be staged at the MCG in a couple of years' time. A day-night affair. It has caused consternation amongst many. Why on earth is it a day-night affair when it is celebrating the rich Test history of the game, of which most have been day games?
Well, I think it's celebrating the history, but it's also an eye to the future. From a practical perspective, it's in March, which is not in the school holidays, and people are at work, so it means more people can come after school and after work. But it's a great spectacle. I mean, day-night cricket of any format, whether that's night games for T20, day-nighters for one-days, or day-night tests, there's something about it when the lights come on. There's a real vibe around the place, and I think hopefully it works well as well for people watching on TV in both all around the world as well. So that starting a little bit later on. We announced it a little while back. The people that come out of the woodwork that talk about being there in 1977 for the centenary test and the impact it had on them. We're already starting and got a little group together about how we can make that an incredible celebration, a global celebration of the pinnacle format of the game.
Well, Nick, you'll be able to go along as a fan and enjoy it by that stage if you're still in Australia. Thank you so much for being with us on Stumped as Nick Hockley, the outgoing Chief Executive of Cricket Australia. Well, that's all we've got time for on this week's Stumped for Akash Varney. Don't forget you can follow us on X. We're at BBCWS Sports, and use the hashtag BBC Stumped. And check us out on YouTube as well. Go to BBC World Service on YouTube. My thanks to Chari Sharma, Brett Sprigg, and to all of you for listening. Speak to you next week. Bye-bye.
Stumped is a BBC Sport production for the BBC World Service in association with ABC and Akash Varney.